In this second part of our roundup of 2023 and outlook for next year, we turn to Northern Europe, in particular the Nordic region and Germany. I'm Richard Sverrisson, and I'm joined by my colleagues Gert over Mollestad, who's editor for Norway. A warm welcome to you, Gert.
Thank you.
And to Olav Vilnes, who's editor Nordics. Welcome to you, Olav.
Thank you.
And finally, last but not least, Andreas Lochner, who's editor Germany. Very good to have you on the pod again, Andreas. Now, I think I'd like to start with the Nordic region, Olav. Again, 2023 was a very eventful year. Could you highlight some of the key developments in the Nordic region?
It was very interesting. I mean, if you go 1 year back, I think the average system price in the Nordic region was about 200 euros. Then you had a very wet summer, and suddenly you had a price at I think it averaged down at 13 euros in the early or late summer in August. So and in between there, you even had negative prices for the first time across the region. Never seen so low prices before, and then it came up again in the autumn when demand started to rise. And I think now you're back at around 90 euros on a Nordic level. So it's been a very volatile ride this year, price-wise.
And how about in Norway? What were the key issues in Norway, Gert?
No, well, as Olav mentioned, the very low prices in Oslo. Actually, we had following the storm Hans, which poured down like 11 terawatt hours of rain over eastern Norway and Sweden. We got a September average for eastern Norway at 0.98 euro for the megawatt hour, and we have never seen so low prices in Norway ever since the start of the power market. So last year we had record high prices, and this year we have had record low prices. So it's really a volatile market, as Olav said. And we even had a dam breach due to all the water. So there was a power plant that was flooded and collapsed during the storm. So it was a really serious event here in the early autumn.
And how about Germany, Andreas? That we didn't really see very low prices there, did we?
Yeah, I mean the situation in Germany is quite different from the Nordic region. We've seen a longer-term price trend to the downside, so prices were generally falling over the year, but still they are at a very high level, more than double the level than we've seen in the past decade from 2011 to 2020. So we're still at price levels that we wouldn't have expected before the war, Russia against Ukraine. And we can't expect to see prices like this, like in the last decade, anytime soon.
Olav, if I can turn to you and ask about sort of wider things, and one country in the Nordic region in particular, which saw sort of quite tumultuous events really in 2023, and that's Finland. Could you describe some of the, I was thinking in terms of supply, but also a little bit of a bidding error on the spot market. Could you just talk us through that?
Finland had a very interesting year, actually. I remember last autumn, I think we had this conference, Finnish Energy Day, when the TSO was there, and he was really concerned about the supply that winter because you had cut off the lines to Russia due to the war, and then you also had yet to complete this big nuclear plant, Olkiluoto 3. Now, that did come online like in April for commercial use this year. So you missed it for the whole of the coldest part of the winter last year, but still managed because the weather was relatively mild and also people saved energy because of the high prices. Olkiluoto came on, and suddenly Finland also had the lowest prices in the Nordic region in the summer because then you had also a lot of new wind coming in. So it was extremely volatile. And then, of course, if you continue with Finland, you also had a gas incident there as well, the Baltic connector that went offline in the autumn due to potential sabotage. They never really found a reason for that, but it also isolated Finland as a gas market, and they now have to rely solely on LNG, which drives up local prices compared to the rest of the Baltic Sea region. So those are fundamental things. And then, of course, just the icing on the cake was this bidding mistake that came now in late November when you had Connect Energy erroneously bidding in a huge sales bid every hour. I think half of the Finnish consumption. and drove prices down to minus 500 euros for 10 hours and created potentially could have created a system collapse. But that was, of course, a very one of these very strange incidents that happens that no one could really foresee.
Absolutely. So a very interesting year in many ways in Finland. But Gert, what happened in Norway in the policy side in particular?
Well, the current government is really struggling with one party opposing Norwegian membership in the EU, and then you have the Labour Party, which is, at least partly a pro, and this influence all kind of policy making in the government. And just a couple of weeks ago, the finance minister from the Centre Party, he kind of proposed not to renew old cables to Denmark. So there's a real tension within the government of how Norway will cooperate on the power side with the rest of Europe. So it bogs everything down, and there's a huge delay in implementing new EU regulation in Norway due to this. So it's a headache that probably won't disappear as long as these two parties are in government together.
So, and that's the hot topic, or the hot potato, if you like, of the cables, the interconnectors. That's always been quite controversial in Norway, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's really kind of making a very tense debate. And you also saw that during summer and early autumn, when the southernmost part of Norway had quite higher prices than the rest of Norway, both due to the incident with all the water that came in the eastern part of Norway during the storm, but also the stronger connection to the continent. So you had a really division within southern Norway, and that's kind of a new thing, and there's been a lot of political tensions regarding that. And I don't think that will disappear anytime soon, and maybe even be amplified with the new Viking link coming from Denmark to the UK, which also can kind of drive up prices a bit further, for instance, in southern Norway. So you get an even stronger connection to the UK from southern Norway, both with we had the direct link, but also with the new cable, which is coming from Denmark.
Yeah, and obviously that's not so popular in Southern Europe. But something that we also reported, I think we broke the story, Gert, wasn't it, that big industrial production or aluminium producers are thinking of shutting down production in parts of Norway?
Yeah, because the parts of industry that is not hedged with long-term contracts, they are really struggling due to the high prices, obviously. And there's, I don't know, is around 50% of the aluminium production in Europe has been closed down due to the energy crisis. And there are some plants in Norway which also have reduced production, and some are considering even stopping completely due to this. The current plant to Alcoa in southern Norway, they managed to get a contract with Statkraft for 1 year, but what will happen after when that expires, that's we have to wait and see. But the high prices really has an impact on the industry. That's quite clear.
We're seeing that very clearly. Absolutely good. So if we move then to Germany, Andreas, and what happened there? You highlighted what happened on with prices, wholesale electricity prices in particular. But what were the key kind of policy issues or developments that we saw over the last 12 months?
The key policy issues, there were quite a few. It was a busy year. But I mean, in general, regarding energy policy, we've seen a very strong performance of the German government, in my opinion, in 2022, when they governed the whole crisis, like dampening the impact of the Russian attack on Ukraine. They had to manage the nationalization of major gas importers like Uniper and the former Gazprom Germania, so securing energy for Europe, it's now called. They had to manage to get LNG import capacities, and they had to fill the storage capacities, gas storage capacities in Germany. So they had quite a lot of tasks to fulfill, and they sort of managed to. But in 2023, the performance was rather weak then. They tabled a law for decarbonizing the heat sector, which is sort of necessary if you want to reach carbon neutrality by 2045, but they received a lot of resistance on that. So also within the government, again in Germany as well as in Norway, there was a lot of tension within the government about this law, and the whole sort of mood in the in the country turned around. So there's a lot of resistance against sort of climate protection measures, renewables expansion, and so on. And then we've also seen the budget disaster recently with a constitutional court ruling wiping out 60 billion euros out of a necessary fund to finance the green transition. And now they have even more problems because they lack money. And 60 billion euros, that's not nothing, it's quite sizable. And this will be an issue for the next couple of years because they want to invest a lot into decarbonization of the industry, green steel, to name it, green hydrogen, of obviously renewables expansion, and at some point they may run out of money, and that's a problem, obviously.
So, in a sense, Germany's been at the forefront of the boom in renewables in terms of rolling out wind and solar, but now it seems to be slowing then from opposition at ground roots level, and also because there's no money to fund it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see. I mean, this year we've seen a record year for solar expansion, for example. We've seen 12 gigawatts so far this year, solar capacity rise. We might see that again in 2024, but if we look at the figures now, we've seen this year for the first time ever, more than 50% of electricity stemming from renewables, which was in total 267 terawatt hours. But again, that's below target really for Germany's way to 2030 when they want to reach 600 terawatt hours of renewables electricity. And as I mentioned already, we see already a lot of resistance in Germany against renewables projects, against the government in total. So if we have to more than double the electricity coming from renewables, it will be quite a struggle.
Absolutely, not so many low-hanging fruit left, I suppose. But I think, even 275 terawatt hours of renewable production. I mean, that's very 67. Sorry, close to 270 is very, very impressive indeed. But before I turn to what you expect to see next year, Andreas, I'd just like to ask Olav, and what you think will be the key issues in the Nordic region next year, in the next 12 months, for example, Olav?
I think a major issue is, of course, there's a big news. You need a lot of new renewables, and you need investment decisions to get to these targets, 2030 targets, and to meet also rising demand, or at least expectations of rising demand as societies electrify and use electricity wider in the transport sector, so in the industry and so on. And I think that the tempo there with the cost increases is a big challenge. The first ever Norwegian tender this autumn, this winter, will show this big uncertainty on whether people will actually commit to that if it becomes too expensive or not. You have Denmark have 9 gigawatt of offshore tenders lined up for next year. It's a huge amount of wind that should come online. Or a lot of competition therefore to build offshore wind farms that should come online by 2030. So I think there's a big race there to build renewables, and then you also have the Swedish plans to build nuclear, which is a different thing that will also see more of concrete how they will design maybe a subsidy scheme, CFDs that can make them reach this new target of getting 2.5 gigawatt new nuclear capacity online within by 2035. It can also be interesting to follow next year.
Would that be interesting? Are they going for SMRs, or haven't they really decided on what kind of nuclear reactors they would like?
I think they will leave it up to the market participants. But if you look at the communication, I think the Swedes have come quite far, also suggesting you need larger units, not only SMRs. If you look at that, listen to the energy minister. There's also a process in parallel going on in Finland to build new nuclear. But I think in Finland there's more an SMR debate because they already have these large reactors now, and they probably see that if the reactors get too big, then it's difficult to manage a system. So that there's probably more small scale there and maybe large scale. But I think that's up to the market participants to decide what they want to invest in, and then it's up to the government to just come up with the schemes.
Obviously, it's very costly and time consuming to build these large scale nuclear facilities, as we've seen both in France, Finland, and in the UK. But what are the expectations then for prices, Olav, in the region? What are analysts saying? What are the people that you speak to on a daily basis saying where we're heading in terms of wholesale?
I think we will have another very, very volatile year because it's very much due to hydrology. I mean, if you have a very wet summer, you can get really, really cheap, as it did last year, because you have all the new wind that increases every year in the market, so you get a much stronger downside. But then again, if it dries up and you need to, then prices always historically go up to the short-term marginal cost of coal or gas-fired plants, and as long as gas prices are as high as they are right now. I mean, they're lower than they were last year, but they're still high from a historical perspective. That creates also a higher upside. So that's why you saw this year, went from 0 in the summer to now 80, 90 euros in the winter. So I think that's big, much more volatility than you did in the past or in the 2010s.
Absolutely. And Gert, in Norway, what do you think? What do you expect to be the key issues? Your crystal ball is out now. What do you think is going to happen next year?
Yeah, well, a very interesting thing will be how the acquisition of the financial markets in the Nordic will be. EX announced in June, I think it was, that they will buy the Nasdaq Commodity Exchange in Oslo. So and take over the financial Nordic power market, but there might be some competition issues there. So the European Union is looking at that issue, and if they're going to allow the acquisition, and then potentially that can be a really major change for the Nordic power market as we have known it so far. It was the first of its kind in the world, and there might be a really big changes if the EX gets the green light and go through with their plans. They're talking about trading in the bidding zones instead of a financial market linked to the system price. So there might be a kind of the end of the financial Nordic market as we know it. So that will be a huge change if they go through with that. So that's quite exciting to see how that will pan out.
But in terms of policy, also, do you expect any changes to the cables debate or for example, the growth of wind in Norway?
Oh, there's hardly any wind onshore coming on. There's hardly any concession applications in, and so there will hardly be any new onshore wind power in Norway until 2030. But the major point will be the auction for the first offshore wind park in the southern called Sørlige Nordsjø 2 in Norwegian. So just offshore Denmark, actually. So it's very far from the Norwegian market and thus very expensive to build out. So there is a dealing there for 23 billion NOK in subsidies. And the question is it enough for the player to actually go and bid in the auction? And that will be very exciting to see in the first quarter. I think they will announce that auction. And we got the green light from the regulatory body Enza yesterday on that subsidy scheme. So that will be
so exciting. You and your Norway team will obviously be watching this very closely, and we'll be reporting on it Montel News. Yeah. Finally, Andreas. So what do you think? What are going to be the key developments in 2024 in Germany? I mean, are we still reeling in the aftermath of this constitutional court decision, or will there be other issues as well at play?
Well, I think the main issues next year will be one thing is the power plant strategy, which the German economy ministry plans to table in Q1. Germany needs backup capacity of roughly 25 gigawatts to back renewables generation. So they're very well known. When the wind doesn't blow, what do we do? thing.
The Germans have a key word for that, don't they? When it's in the winter, what's that again, Andreas?
Dunkelflaute, it's called. Yeah. Dunkelflaute. So when it's dark and there's no wind, so no sun and no wind, and the problem is really next year is 2024 already. We need the units by 2030. So within 6 years, 25 gigawatts. That's quite challenging, and many doubt that this will happen. So, but they want to table the strategy in Q1, hopefully. I mean, they initially planned to table it in Q1 2023. So 1 year delay. So even less time to build the units. So that's one major thing to happen. And at the same time, obviously, if you don't know which capacity will come online by 2030, there will be speculation about the coal exit, because obviously Germany also plans to exit coal-fired generation and lignite-fired generation. But so far, we need those units to cover demand. So the two policy issues here are linked, but they are probably the most important issues in 2024. And market-wise, as Olav mentioned, for the Nordic region, it will also be probably super volatile. I mean, in Germany, the forward market really depends on the gas prices. That means nowadays, LNG prices. But on the spot market this year already, we've seen everything between minus 500 and plus 500 for our hourly prices. And this will obviously continue with the expansion of renewables.
So if I understand you correctly, gentlemen, we're in for another bumpy ride in 2024. So Olav, Gert and Andreas, thank you very much for being guests on the Montel Weekly Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you.
In the final part of our end-of-year episode, we turn our attention to global fuel markets. That is to say, LNG, gas and coal. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Laurence Walker, Montel's Deputy-in-Chief. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you.
And Andreas Cala, who's our LNG correspondent. And also a warm welcome to you, Andreas.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me, start off by asking you, as I have done to all of our, really, or many of our key journalists, is what were the most important issues in 2023, Laurie?
Well, I mean, I'd say it's been a year of uncertainty. So following a massively turbulent 2022, but it's ultimately been a good year in terms of supply security for both coal and gas. Then we ended a rather mild winter last year with higher than expected stocks for the fuels, which kind of put the region on a fairly good footing for this year. There's of course been lots of bumps along the way, lots of concerns. There's been things such as the Australia LNG strikes, the damage to the Baltic connector in Finland, which people initially thought was perhaps linked to some kind of sabotage, like with the Nord Stream, which spooked people a bit. There's been the ongoing war in Ukraine, and then obviously the war in the Middle East, which has obviously caused concern in certain areas. We have yet to see real impact on supplies or issues, but certainly from a geopolitical viewpoint, it's been a concern. And then, but I mean, in terms of all of these things, that's been really, really lasting in terms of supply issues. So it's kind of been I'd say it's been still fairly turbulent, still fairly uncertain, but it's been successful in some ways in terms of supply, certainly reaching our stock levels ahead of winter and in maintaining new supply routes.
Absolutely, that's for Europe in particular.
Yes.
Here that we're talking, Laurie. And Andreas, what for LNG? I mean, it's also I think it'd be fair to say another turbulent year given the geopolitical situation.
Sure. It's been not just for LNG, but for gas markets in general. It's been a tight, as Laurie was saying, tight, shaky from my point of view, and very geopolitical year. I mean, fundamentally, the gas balance has not been that bad. It's actually been good, mostly on robust pipeline supply, and robust LNG. We're gonna import into Europe just about the same amount of LNG that we did last year in 2023. So yeah, 2023 numbers should look pretty similar to 2022. And to be more exact, that's about 30% of total LNG import, global LNG import. So global LNG imports were 550 BCM, and Europe took in this year around 30% of that. Asia took in the 66%. Obviously, the rest of the world took the remaining share. But it was also the year, in my view, where especially LNG consolidated its role as a global fuel, with both Asia and Europe depending and competing for it. It used to be more, Europe used to be the sink market that changed with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but this year it consolidated as a global fuel. But of course, the unintended result of that was the market became ultra sensitive to geopolitics. We had first the Australia strikes, although they, as Laurie mentioned, they really didn't affect the European balance very much. Then we had the Middle Eastern turmoil, first reflected on Egyptian disruptions to Egyptian LNG exports. Then we had concern over the Canal of Suez, initially over the Gaza war, but now more recently with potential disruptions to shipping routes. And I think what we witnessed this week pretty much spells out what was the remainder of the year, or what 2023 was like. We had prices spike on Monday, and then lose all those gains on the following day. And that's pretty much a narrative of what gas prices driven by LNG have done this year.
I mean, we're recording this just before Christmas, but so the developments you're describing here, Andreas, just are really an indication of how nervous the market remains, isn't it?
Surely does, and again, in my view, that this goes back again to LNG becoming a global fuel. I mean, let's not forget that the European balance, the reason we have been able to achieve a balance this year. Now, the two main drivers. One is demand destruction. Demand destruction is the number one balancing driver in European markets. But there's been also strong competition and geopolitics involved, and ultra sensitive markets to any minor, at the end of the day, minor impact on European balance, and we saw that constantly, and it's a new world. It's a new world for Europe, for certainly, and for the European gas market.
Absolutely, and Laurie, I mean, you've been covering global and European, of course, coal markets for many years. What's happening in terms of coal burn in Europe? Is it really massively reduced, and are we on track to sort of, basically phase out that fossil fuel from power generation on the continent and also in the UK?
Yes, I think certainly we're seeing a lot of reduction in coal usage, certainly in terms of imports as well. So, for example, this year I think we're going to be looking at possibly around more than a 40% drop in thermal coal imports to Europe. This is down quite substantially, so we're looking at 40 million tons compared with over 70 million tons last year. Of course, last year it was there was more of a rush and a panic to buy lots of coal and secure coal because we weren't sure what the situation was going to be with gas. Where we're going to reduce the amount of Russian gas. We're getting a lot less Russian gas, but where are we going to find alternative sources? As Andreas has mentioned, yes, we have. We've managed to find lots of LNG. We've had more from Norway. We've had more alternative origins. So we haven't kind of really needed this coal so much. And as I mentioned before, we began the year with massive stocks. These stocks are still fairly substantial now, even going into winter. And yes, we will be using coal. At the same time, we'll be using less. The UK, for example, next year is going to close Britain's going to close its last plant, so the Ratcliffe plant. So there will be perhaps a heightened dependence on gas in the interim, but certainly less coal being burnt and less coal being consumed, and less reliance on it. And we've managed to go from substantial volumes of Russian coal, Russian coal being the main supplier to Europe, to zero Russian coal now since August last year due to the sanctions, and it hasn't been a problem. In fact, we're seeing probably reductions in coal imports from every origin this year to Europe, which kind of shows how much we have reduced our reliance on that fuel.
No, it's and I think as far as Andreas is talking about the demand destruction, that's certainly been the case for industry, up to 15-20% reduction in gas use. We're seeing an increasing reliance on that fuel because of we're burning less coal. Wouldn't that be fair to say as well, Laurie?
Yes, I mean, certainly if you look at the historical data as well, we've seen a rise in gas usage over the past decades in Europe. Yes, it's being used as a fuel. It's using as a transitional fuel, you could say, or as a baseload fuel while we're reducing our reliance on the slightly dirtier stuff like coal. But yes, ultimately, coal's on the way out, and over in a decade or two, possibly gas will be facing a similar trajectory.
That's that of course remains to be seen. And in the first part of this episode, we talked a lot about what's happening in Germany and the need to build out up to 25 gigawatts of new gas-fired capacity, which is enormous. But Andreas, if we turn to 2024, what do you think will be the key issues?
I think it's going to look very similar to 2023. I mean, for no other reason that fundamentally we're in the same shape. We're still very, very tight. There is not a lot of production coming online in terms of LNG. We expect Norway to sustain its robust pipeline supply. Same with Algeria, Azerbaijan, even Russia, although it comes into question. But so structurally, we're in pretty much a very similar position, except I think gas will become will further evolve into a global commodity. And what I mean with that, I mean geopolitics is going to keep driving prices all over the place. We'll see what the war or the turmoil in the Middle East is far from over. We can still expect a lot of surprises. I mean, some analysts expect the war to last well into spring and beyond, and that's without any escalation. As I mentioned before, there's going to be Russian surprises. Is Europe going to sanction Russian LNG? Are we going to limit Russian gas imports? That remains to be seen. And then it's a country decision. It becomes a member country decision now, but that remains to be seen. And Russia could also do it unilaterally. It certainly has intent and has motive to do it. So all that remains in the crystal ball to be seen next year. There's always infrastructure issues. I mean, let's remember Freeport earlier this year. It only came back. It was out for almost a year, but that's when prices fell in the European Union when Freeport came back online. There were several factors, Norway, of course, but it was an infrastructure reason and an infrastructure driver. And these disruptions could happen again anywhere. And the world is, or global gas markets are certainly sensitive enough to stay on edge, to remain on edge over that. And then finally, I think one of the key issues is what happens in November 2024. We have U.S. elections, and that is going to change the dynamic geopolitically and in every other way quite significantly. And that will also be a driver for global gas markets, not just in 2024, but beyond.
Absolutely, Andreas. I think that's quite key. We've seen as we talk, the disqualification of Donald Trump. We'll see how that develops in Colorado. But there's one area which I'd also want to ask you about, Andreas, and that's Asian demand for LNG. I mean, we've seen that being quite muted so far, but is that expected to come back in 2024?
It's kind of like the analogous to, is cold going to come back? I mean, we've been lucky to have two very mild winters, and that's the only reason we were also able to balance the European gas system, because we were able to store a lot of gas, and thanks to 2 consecutive mild winters. Well, it's as I said, it's analogous to Chinese especially, but Asian demand in general, but Chinese specifically. Will it come back? I mean, sure. I mean, that's what we've all been anticipating, and we just don't know when it's going to happen. And I don't think there's a lot of clarity of when, but it will happen. Asia as a whole will come back. Demand is increasing. The number of contracts that will be that will start delivering into Asia are increasing year on year. So the market can only further tighten, even, and that's without involving a cold winter or any disruption or anything like that. So Asia will come back, and it will tighten the market further, and we'll see really how Europe manages to compete in that scenario.
Absolutely. And so, Laurie, what do you think? What's your view of the most important developments, market developments, and policy for 2024?
Well, I mean, I'd certainly agree with everything that Andreas said there. I think obviously Russia is going to remain an elephant in the room, perhaps a smaller elephant than in the past, but certainly an elephant. I think we have, for example, there's certain points. Obviously, the restocking is going to be very important. So I think we have a target of around 45% across Europe by February or so. So obviously, once we get to February, we'll be able to see a little bit of a marker of where we've got to and what the outlook is going to be from there. In terms of Russia, we have their transit agreement via Ukraine is going to expire in December. So that's something I'm guessing there's going to be talk about. Certainly, will they renew it? Probably the chances are they won't. But if they don't, do we need it? So will we have reduced demand enough not to need that supply, which accounts for maybe 5% of our supply at present? If not, will they redirect it elsewhere? So I think there'll be talk about that. That'll be an interesting area. And then just in terms of just the general shenanigans, will there be more disruptions? Will there be increases? Will there be sabotage again? Will there be these sort of points? I think there'll be that level of uncertainty related to Russia, certainly. And then, as Andreas was saying, it's going to be the age-old issues of what the weather is doing, what's what people are, how much people need the power. So yes, and obviously we have the ongoing issues in the Middle East. Will this escalate further? That's going to certainly be a key point to account for. And yes, I'd say those are probably some of the main issues, really.
So I think if I could judge from what you're saying here, gentlemen, that it's going to be another very busy period for you and for Montel News in general, what we need to cover in the months ahead. There's
potential for a lot of wild cards still. I think a lot of things that could be thrown into the mix that take us by surprise. So yes, it's going to be a year of keeping a close eye on everything.
Laurie and Andreas, thank you very much for being guests on the Montel Weekly podcast.
Thank you, Richard.
With pleasure.